Thank you very much, Sam. I'm most grateful for this invitation, and it gives me a chance to think again about somebody who's been rather important through my life, and I'm extremely honoured that so many of you have turned up, people who knew Paddy Leigh Fermor, and people who care about this remarkable figure. My title makes a point. I wasn't, of course, sure what I would say, and I'm hardly sure now what I'm going to say. But when one's asked to give a talk, what is one going to say that will not falsify the title? But Broken Roads, obviously the Broken Road is the name of the third volume of what therefore becomes a trilogy of his walk from the Hook of Holland to Constantinople. Fractured histories alluding to three histories, and I want to talk about them in particular today, and then convenient identities, which I thought was a rather mean-spirited way of describing Leigh Fermor, that he's as a sort of convenient person, that in fact he was always an upper middle class English gentleman, wherever he was, whatever the situation, and therefore could always get away with it, and he certainly did get away with many things. But I would like to think more about the word, what might be meant by the word convenient. So to talk about the Broken Road first, the difficulty, the immense difficulty that Leigh Fermor had in completing the trilogy. He got to Romania, he stops, he cannot get beyond. We have the time of gifts we have between the woods and the water, and then he cannot finish it, and it's only at the very end, or it's only after his death, that his biographer, Artemis Cooper, completes the third volume, The Broken Road, completing it with an incomplete sentence, which is a very nice way to go. And this is a story in itself of a sort of writer's block, one which in a lecture that I gave 8 years ago, which is available on YouTube, and therefore I don't want to repeat it entirely because anyone could listen to it. But I spoke there about the difficulty of thinking about Constantinople, as he called it, rather than Istanbul or Stambul. Well, he does use the word Stambul in a couple of places, but never Istanbul. That this has to do with the fracturing of Greek history, of the classical Greece, the Hellenic past, and the Byzantine past, and the Romaic, which is the word that the word used by the Greeks to describe themselves as within the Ottoman Empire. The Greeks called themselves Romaic to indicate that the population of the Eastern Roman Empire is indeed Roman. So it's completely counterintuitive to Western Europeans, for whom anything to do with Roman, unless it's Romany, Roma is Greek. So this problem for Greek identity is one which has been there from the time, well, from longer before, but certainly at the time of independence, the whole independence movement, which was both a movement of independence of the Greek people, as it were, the ordinary Greek people, but it was supported by people like Lord Byron and others in Britain and France and Germany, who wanted not so much the independence of the Greek people from the Turkish Empire, the Ottoman Empire, but who wanted to see the restoration of ancient Greece. And Leigh Fermor, in many of his books, all of his books, I think, attacks this and says this is absurd. We cannot expect people to go back, or to behave in a manner which suits those who sort of sponsor this illusion of the past, this ideal of classical civilization, that these people should then be expected to dress up dress up in a fancy dress and do everything that was expected of them to conform to the classical past. And indeed, there were various attempts in the 1920s and 30s by Natalie Barney and others to recreate the various classical Greek rituals and dance and so forth. And Leigh Fermor was against all this. And one of the reasons why he's against this, as I say, is the idea that the Hellenic is what he does not, what he resists on behalf of the Greek people, whom of course he'd come to know very well, at least the Cretan people, and then during the war when he played such an extraordinary role in the resistance in Crete, and then after the war when he was briefly working for the British government in Athens, the Ministry of Information. He was against this idea of Greece as somehow the recreation of Periclean Athens in our time. He wanted Greek culture to be, as it were, suitable for contemporary Greeks. And it's worth pointing out that, the dominance of classical Greece in the Western imagination is such that, as far as I know, all other languages are known to have, or most other languages are known to have an ancient form, so that English has Old English and German has Middle High German, and Scandinavian languages have Old Norse, and so on and so on, and all the Romance languages can trace themselves back to Latin. But of all of these languages, only Greek has to be modified by the term modern. It's a pretty shocking thought. We don't say modern English when we mean not the English they used in Beowulf, but we have to say modern Greek when we want to mean not the Greek used in Homer or by Plato or anyone else. I don't think there's another language where the weight of the classical is so powerful that even in English to this day, we still, if we say, "Oh, do you know Greek?" we suppose that to mean classical Greek rather than contemporary Greek. And the force of that is something which Leigh Fermor was, I think, deeply conscious of always. But before going on to the further considerations of fractured histories, I want to point out that a sort of, not a psychological point, but a strange thing in Leigh Fermor's life, that he was that he'd had such an extraordinary life, and there was plenty of evidence of that life, and yet it was not until almost exactly 50 years ago, September 1977, that saw the publication of A Time of Gifts. And that suddenly transformed Leigh Fermor from, I think, a person known to a few Greek specialists, a few people interested in the Second World War, and so on, turned him into, suddenly, the recognition of what all the reviewers said, the greatest travel writer of the age, the greatest travel writer in the language, and so on and so on. It was A Time of Gifts that made Leigh Fermor's reputation. And I think, I'm not sure, but I suspect that for many of us it was the first book that we read. I don't say all, but certainly as I came to Leigh Fermor in 1977 through a time of gifts, I approach it from that, and I distinctly remember the reviews coming out and the sense of discovery. And if I'm to put this in terms of fractured histories, there are two other histories that I'm concerned with here. One is the subject of his first book, A Traveller's Tree, which is an extraordinarily good book about the Caribbean. The Caribbean as a geographical area, including those parts of it that belong to the British Empire, those parts of it that belong to the French, that had belonged to the Dutch, the Danish, and other empires. That study of the Caribbean seems to me to be a work of serious history, which is neglected. I'm glad to say that there's an American scholar called Joshua Jelly Shapiro, who has written the introduction to a reissue of the book by New York Review of Books, one of their editions, in which he points these things out, says how extraordinarily progressive this is. It shows not the slightest concern for the loss of empire or fear of independence from a British point of view. Indeed, the place the one place that he really does not like in the Caribbean is Barbados, which of course is, as he sees, the most parodically British of all the parts of the Caribbean. He finds this a very he finds it just pastiche and parody and servile imitation of English ways. And I suspect that his chapter on Barbados has some anger in it, because he can see a connection between that and how the Greeks have to live under the expectation that they're going to behave as if they were classical Greeks, as if they were living in Athens of the old days, and they were all going to be singing Homeric songs and talking in Platonic dialogues. And he could see this in Barbados, and he could see the racism, and he opposes. He's against all of that. But as Jelly Shapiro says, he is not only does he attack the imperial control that is exercised by the empire over places like Barbados. He goes elsewhere and goes exploring in hidden corners and so on, and comes across something called Rastafari. And he investigates Rastafari, and he says he's baffled by it. He sees that they are that they have this devotion to Haile Selassie and so on. And of course, he wasn't to know that within 30 or 40 years, the Rastafarians would be almost the most famous thing about the Caribbean. Well, I say he wasn't to know, but anyway, he was to know. And as far as Jelly Shapiro hedges his bets, and so will I, but it may be that Leigh Fermor was the first person ever to have taken interest in the Rastafarians, which would be not a bad accomplishment as a sort of historian, traveller, anthropologist. And his book, which came out in 1950, is one which had a considerable influence, and this has also been pointed out. Had a considerable influence on Derek Walcott. Derek Walcott was raised on the island of St. Lucia. Whenever he uses the phrase "a traveller's tree," I take it that he's paying some sort of tribute to Leigh Fermor. But what is important is that he does not attack Leigh Fermor as typical of the imperial writers, the imperialist writers, who go off to the Caribbean and they write about it and they say these people got to get more tax out of them, got to get more work out of them. Really, they have such strange habits, and so on and so on. He doesn't see it that way at all. And Leigh Fermor is, for Walcott, I think he is actually an extremely important source. I haven't yet worked on this seriously, but I want to go through all of Walcott's work, not just Omeros, where a traveller's tree is mentioned very near the beginning. And to think that, Walcott writes Omeros, he rewrites Homer in that archipelago of the Caribbean, and obviously playing with as it were, the invoking of the characters of Greek myth in a Caribbean setting. And then you think of Leigh Fermor with already his experience of the of Crete during the Second World War, then going to the Caribbean, 1947, 48, writing about it, publishing it in 1950. What a useful thing this must have been, or not useful perhaps in any conscious sense, but what a triangulation we have there of the Homeric, the Caribbean, and then both Leigh Fermor and Derek Walcott. And I suspect that, as I say, that it's by far the best book on the Caribbean written up to that point. There are people like C.L.R. James will be writing in the 1950s. And this is something which it's worth reading Walcott, looking out for a traveller's tree and looking out for a sense of indebtedness to Leigh Fermor. I suspect that Walcott couldn't bring himself to say how much he owed to Leigh Fermor, but I think it's greatly to the credit of both of them that nowhere does Walcott denounce Leigh Fermor as he does many other people, and as others just treat Leigh Fermor as a typical English voyeur come to the Caribbean to look and say nasty things. So this is one of the a sort of a blending, if you like, or a mixing together of broken histories, a forcing together of broken histories. The broken history of Greece and the broken history of the Caribbean, or the history of the Caribbean that was about to be broken, that would be broken in the late 1950s and early 1960s with the West Indian Federation, and then all those separate little separate nations, of which the British West Indies have become. And this is Leigh Fermor's mirror of what was going on in Greece. That looking at the West Indies is a way of seeing Greece emerging out of classicism, out of Hellenism, out of Byzantium, each of those phases of Greek history, and then modern Greece emerges. Something of this sort is happening in the Caribbean, and he can sort of makes these connections, although of course he doesn't yet know how important Greece will be in his. Walcott doesn't yet know how important Greece will. Leigh Fermor doesn't yet know how important Greece will be in his subsequent life, nor of course would Walcott have known at that point. And the third of the broken histories that I want to consider is the time of publication of A Time of Gifts, because it came out in 1977 based on diaries which Leigh Fermor had written when he was walking across Europe, down the Rhine, then crossing to the Danube and along the Danube into Romania, writing this in the 1930s, and invoking a world that had by then been completely shattered, first by the Second World War and then by the communist takeover of Romania, Hungary, Yugoslavia, Bulgaria. And all the countries that he visited. He didn't visit Czechoslovakia on that journey, I don't think. So that the world that he evokes in those diaries is sort of almost lost. It's almost a magical invocation that we're suddenly transported back to this world, well, this world of castles and aristocrats and learned people and servants and a generally wonderful life, against which you might have thought communism was well justified in protesting. That you only have to read this book to say, oh, well, yes, that's how it was. But the amazing thing is that if his diaries had been published, or if he'd written those diaries up immediately after his travels, as he did with The Traveller's Tree, and published them in, say, 1936, 37, there they would be, and we'd say, oh, yes, that was that sort of, that world that preceded the world that's been lost. But by, and probably people would have thought they were snobbish and not of no particular interest. But to have them appear in 1977 at one of the most intense periods of the Cold War, when people were by now disillusioned about communism, as they were not in the 1930s, was suddenly to say, gosh, here is what was lost, but created and presented to us not at the time, but 40 years later. And this was the 70s, the Helsinki Accords of 1975, the development of Samizdat and the dissident movement, of the various concessions made by the Soviet authorities to allow Jews to leave and to go to Israel, and so on and so on. It was a time in which the disillusionment with the Soviet Empire was powerful in the West, and that book appeared to say, look what the Soviet Union destroyed. It doesn't say this specifically, but it gives us this extraordinary picture, this sense of a world that existed only 40 years before, but that has now vanished completely. And so people would say it was an elegiac sort of book, and so on, the reviews. Yes, it was, but it was written not at the time, but with the benefit of a hindsight that is not actually mentioned. And this is, I think, one of the great gifts of a time of gifts, that he doesn't say, of course, now we know. He never says now in that book. He just continues it in the present, in the sort of the present tense as if he were writing it by 1936-37. He'd received the diaries by a fluke. He'd retrieved the diaries from his Romanian lover by indirect means, and he doesn't say, "Oh, this was the walk I took 40 years ago." No, this is my young self speaking, and my young self speaking. And I will continue to impersonate, to assume the voice of my young self aged 18, 19. And many people have suspected Leigh Fermor of a certain amount of deception. And there's a recent book by Michael O'Sullivan, which does indeed expose the deceptions, which he himself confessed to, that he altered a few things, gave himself a horse. Did he give himself a horse because it was more romantic than just carrying on walking? Or did he give himself a horse because actually he'd been given a lift by car and he didn't want to admit this? So there are these sorts of things which O'Sullivan has sort of gone into in some detail. But rather, that sense of the walking of the self that walks and the self that writes being identified, being the same self, is one which you find in other travel writers, and there are reasons to be suspicious of this. In particular, I noted in the case of Robert Byron, whose The Road to Oxiana is often upheld as one of the other classics of English travel writing of the 20th century. His biographer, James Knox, who wrote a biography about 20 years ago, says, well, yes, in his notes it just says, desert, expanse, mountains to the left, river to the right. This then comes out as, and then looming into sight with the dawn came the mountains of this. Gives all the historical background and so on and so on. And of course, of which Byron knew absolutely nothing, or he didn't know what he was looking at. And Knox says, so he wrote the whole thing sitting at home with an encyclopedia and a map. And this is, of course, if you think about it, this is how travel writing is almost bound to be, because at least until we have our smartphones, and smartphones wouldn't work in the Gobi Desert or wherever, until we had phones, there really is no way of carrying around an encyclopedia to tell you where you are, or an atlas to tell you where you are, and so on. So that rather amusing expose of Robert Byron's methods, and this was in the 1930s too, we could assume was Leigh Fermor's practice as well. And we know that The Traveller's Tree was written with a certain, not so much with books, because Leigh Fermor, perhaps unlike any other travel writer, or more than any other travel writer, had a quite phenomenal memory. But we'll see more of that later. What he needed to write The Traveller's Tree was silence, and he gave himself that in the monasteries of northern France, which he then describes in A Time to Keep Silence. Two of the three monasteries are ones that he'd stayed in, and he clearly enjoyed that silence, although he never allowed himself the opportunity to repeat it. I think he should have tried to write another book called Another Time to Keep Silence, and then maybe he would have got the third volume finished. But these are the three the three sorts of broken histories that I'm concerned with. But one of those broken histories, now I actually need to read something from here. Oh, it has come back. Just to summarize what he'd done, because I've sort of gone into this in some detail. But in September 1977, Leigh Fermor's name was known to a few readers for the book on the Caribbean, The Traveller's Tree, 1950, A Sketch of Monastic Life, A Time to Keep Silence, 1953, which had, of course, made possible The Traveller's Tree, a strange novel, The Violins of Saint-Jacques, also 1953, and two books on regions of Greece, most unenticingly entitled Mani and Rumeli. Mani 1958, Rumeli 1966. I say unenticingly entitled because, of course, he's now made those areas of Greece, those regions, extremely enticing. So you just have to say Rumeli, oh, Leigh Fermor. Right? But actually, as a way of promoting a travel book about a region of Greece, what could be more off-putting than Mani, Rumeli, without further, well, there's a little subtitle, but it's not the sort of name like A Traveller's Tree or Time of Gifts or something, which he was otherwise rather good on titles. He'd also published in 1955 his translation of George Secundakis' The Cretan Runner, his story of the German occupation. That title is most peculiar, and I'd like to know how it came about. But his story turns Secundakis from the author into the protagonist. The reader might suppose the translator then to be the author. the Cretan runner his story of the German occupation, not my story of the German occupation or a story of the German occupation, but his story. Leigh Fermor makes things clear in his introduction. He's certainly not party to this apparent deception. One of whose grievances is the entire omission of the Cretan resistance from Winston Churchill's history of the Second World War, which had occasioned pain and disappointment, he tells us, in Crete. Yet the resistance activities of the Cretans had been described in Stanley Moss's record, Ill Met by Moonlight, 1950, and I'm honoured and delighted to say that we have Stanley Moss's daughter with us here. And that book came out in 1950, but Paddy doesn't mention it for some reason in this context. That book's subtitle, that is Ill Met by Moonlight, is The Abduction of General Kuyper. And in 1957, the film made a film made of that book brought a sort of worldwide attention to that kidnapping. The film was directed by Powell and Pressburger. It was, in fact, I think, their last collaboration. And the part of Leigh Fermor was taken by Dirk Bogarde. So there's every reason why Leigh Fermor should have been extremely famous by this point. But he doesn't mention the book, he doesn't mention the film in the introduction to The Cretan Runner. This is a very strange thing, and I've been puzzling over this. Why does he not take, as it were, why does he not allow himself the limelight, which clearly he has, because that film was so successful. On the other hand, he was not interested in keeping these things secret. That wasn't his way at all. And I was struck too in puzzling this out by the dust jacket to money, in which the author is described in 1958. And I will read this because I think it's an interesting. It doesn't tell us about the book; it only tells us about the author. Patrick Leigh Fermor is of English and Irish descent and was educated at King's School, Canterbury. It was intended that he should follow an army career, but he preferred, at the age of 18 and a half, to go on a leisurely walking tour from Rotterdam to Constantinople. And it was his experiences during this tour that gave his interest in the history of languages and in the traditional religious and mountain life of remote places a lasting stimulus. He subsequently lived and wandered for some years in many parts of the Balkans and travelled extensively by cake in the Greek archipelago. He enlisted in the Irish Guards at the outbreak of war and became liaison officer to the Greek headquarters in the Italo-Greek War in Albania. He fought in the battles of Greece and Crete, and after the fall of Crete, returned there 3 times, twice by boat and once by parachute, to organize the Cretan resistance movement, living for 2.5 years in the Cretan mountains disguised as a shepherd. He also organized and commanded the operation which ambushed, captured, and evacuated General Kuyper, the German commander of the Sevastopol division in Crete. He was awarded the Distinguished Service Order and OBE and was made honorary citizen of Heraklion for his work in the island during the war. It's all there. It is, in a way, this is sort of promoting himself in 1958, but it did not. The connection does not seem to have been made in the popular mind or in the general awareness of who Leigh Fermor was. Not until it also came together in 1977, and this is something which, as I say, is puzzling. And then it wasn't again until after his death that Chris White put together another volume that Leigh Fermor had himself failed to complete. His account, rather than ill met by moonlight, his account of the capture of General Kruiper, and so he failed to complete that one. He failed to complete this. He failed in so many ways. But no. I'm not having and I'm not having the word failure associated with Patrick Leigh Fermor. I'm only sorry that he apparently went through terrible agonies at his inability to write. I regret that he could not simply have thought that 6 books is quite enough. If only one knew that they would all be in print, all in paperback to this day. It's an amazing accomplishment and quite sufficient. So those are the fractured histories and the convenient identities. Oh my God. Convenient identities. At this point, convenient identities. Yes, I think that there was, when I say I don't want convenient, I should more say coincidental or fortuitous or happy accidents will be more the point. The chronology of his life, from having been exposed so early, at the age of 18, 19, to Mitteleuropa, that world of the Central European aristocracy, the old, well, the sort of the emerging, what was emerging from the Habsburg Empire, as well as the Ottoman Empire, then to go to Crete and to see sort of not so much a historical process as actual resistance in wartime of the Cretans against the Germans, and then to go to the Caribbean and see the emergence of what would, within 15 years, become the independent nations, first of all the West Indian Federation, then the independent nations of the Caribbean, as part of the dissolution of the British Empire, the emergence of the Commonwealth, and so on and so on. But these 3 events, Central Europe, Greece, or 3 places, Central Europe, Crete, and the Caribbean, have no particular logic in themselves, but a sequence can be made of them, and I think was made of them in Leigh Fermor's imagination, in his extraordinary ability to remember one thing in terms of something else. And it is by his metaphors and by his analogies that his work is, of course, so extraordinarily powerful and so irresistible and so rereadable. Because you may remember exactly where he was and what he did, but you won't remember, at least I don't remember, exactly what he was going to remember, what he was going to be reminded of when he was there and when he did that. So there's this sort of, always this metaphorical, analogical way of describing everything. And I don't want to read too much of Leigh Fermor himself, because that is for all of us to do. But I do want to read from the diary that he left, and from which Artemis Cooper was able to draw the last section of the Broken Road. That is the completed section that follows the incomplete sentence that ends the Broken Road. And he doesn't get to Constantinople for reasons that I think have to do with Constantinople as a place that is no longer the destination, the resolution, the sort of the climax of a historical narrative that would end in that would be the end for Byzantine Greece. That Constantinople, that of course by then had fallen into Turkish hands, or Asia Minor had fallen into Turkish hands by the time that he's on his walking there, and in disappointment, or in whatever it was that prevented him not from completing the walk, because he got to Constantinople, instead of writing about that, or no, not instead of writing about it, this is very confusing. He gets to Constantinople, he cannot write about it, but he gets a letter of permission to go to Mount Athos. Now, Mount Athos is the monastic republic which in the northeastern Greece, which remains as a republic for 1,000 years, and one of the longest surviving political societies of all time. Though how this is possible biologically remains a great mystery, given that there are no women at all on Mount Athos, but it survives as a system of government since, I think, 967 was when it was founded. And he goes there, and he keeps a diary. And the publication of that diary in The Broken Road puts to rest all our suspicions, or most of our suspicions, that what Leigh Fermor was doing in A Time of Gifts and The Woods and the Water was editing and, as it were, referring to works of reference, atlases, or anything else, in order to, as it were, make the story better, show off his knowledge and all the rest of it, because the showing off of knowledge is so powerful, so overwhelming, that you can hardly believe it could be, as it were, honestly achieved. And I want to just read this, because this is straight from the diary, the Green Diary, which is what he wrote at the time. He was on Mount Athos, and yes. This morning, I woke up just after dawn and ran to the upper deck. So he's on the boat to the mountain from Thessaloniki to Daphne, which is the beginning of the peninsula. It was one of the most glorious days, sky and sea light blue, plenty of waves and clouds, and to starboard, not half a mile away, the mountains and the pine-clad slopes of the Cassandra Peninsula. I keep trying to recreate it all as it must have been in ancient Greece. Hardly any different, except that our vessel would have been a long galley with painted sails and sweeping oars. Walking round and round on the deck, I thought of the triremes of all the empires that have sailed these same waters, and called to mind the tales about Perseus, Jason, Odysseus, the tyrants of the archipelago, the piracy of Mithridates, and later the Roman galleys packed with legionaries for Thrace or Paphlagonia, and the laden ships of the Eastern Empire of Byzantium. Later, in the time of Marco Polo, came the Genoese and Venetian galleons, sailing to the furthest corners of the Levant, and the Moorish and Arabian corsairs who plundered them, and the ships of the Ottoman Empire trading from the Sublime Porte right down to this morning. I wonder just how much has changed. One thing, however, is reassuring. These pine-clad mountains and golden strands are the same as those on which the heavy helmeted hoplites stood looking seaward, the Macedonia of Philip and Alexander. And he keeps going like this. And then you read on. Goodness me. He tells us that when he gets to Mount Athos, he produces his letter. You need a letter to visit the mountain. And they are impressed because his letter, the abbots in charge at Carriers pulled out their spectacles and examined the patriarch's introductory letter with interest. So when Patrick Leigh Fermor goes to Mount Athos, he doesn't just take a letter from an Orthodox priest to say that, whatever. He takes a letter from the Patriarch of Constantinople. And then he has to write in the guest book and so on and so on. And then he notices, he wrote something on in the flyleaf of the book, and then in the flyleaf of a book he gave to Paddy, and then produced his visitor's book for me to sign. There were several other English names in it. The Crown Prince of Sweden was the name directly before mine. That is King Gustav VI Adolphus, who, when he was a keen archaeologist and historian. And then you read on and on this level, this extraordinary level. And then he's reading Byron, Don Juan, all the time. He takes Don Juan to read on Mount Athos. And then we get to a few pages later. He gets lost on the mountain. It's very easy to get lost on Mount Athos, especially in winter and in the snow. Up till then, he thought of passing the night out in the open without food in the rain. Up till then, I had preserved a dimmish spark of humour, telling myself how I'd laugh about it later, and that though we read about such things in the papers, they didn't happen to one. Then hunger and fatigue-born panic seized me, and I sank onto my rucksack and began to yell for help. A long hello at 6-second intervals. It was echoed back by the mountains, the only other sound being the driving rain and the sea below. Then I gave up, thinking that nobody came that way in a year, and just sat a while, dead beat, and as a last resort said a short but sincere prayer, feeling every kind of swine, because such times, real trouble, are the only times I do. But it was God's mountain, so I felt he had some sort of responsibility. And then, after reading this amazing, amazing diary, I'm turning the pages in a theatrical mode to let you know how full of wonders this is. 11th of February, my 20th birthday. To imagine writing that at the age of 19, unreconstructed, completely unedited since then, the book disappeared, is, I think, extraordinary, that he could go through, whether it be the different boats that have passed through the Aegean Sea since the time of Xerxes and so on, through the Ottoman, Byzantine-Ottoman period and so on. All these observations, these wonderfully witty observations, these delicate natural observations, these historically informed observations, at the age of 19. I do not think there is a diary like it. I would be interested to know of anything to match. And so he goes on, and so it is this passage, this diary, the Mount Athos diary, which he wrote in 1933, that really confirms him as not a fraud, as a travel writer who was experiencing all of these things as he walked, and whose powers of recall, historical recall, were matched, I suppose, only by his linguistic abilities, his musical abilities, where he could pick up languages as he goes along. He notices little dialectal shifts in Hungarian. He said, well, they pronounce that a bit funny, don't they, here? And so he sort of asks him, why do they say this? Why do they say that? Extraordinary ear, extraordinary memory. And here, at last, is the evidence that the 40-year period between the diary that he kept and the appearance of A Time of Gifts and Between the Woods and the Water added nothing substantial. It was all there, and I take it that total recall is a total recall that works and enabled him to write, indeed, in the voice of a 19-year-old, and so that one should read the chapter on Mount Athos, what is now the chapter or the appendix on Mount Athos, and then go back and reread A Time of Gifts and Between the Woods and the Waters in sort of full confidence that this is how he was writing, how he was thinking all the way through. I should say A Time of Gifts is a quotation from a poem by Louis MacNeice. The title was suggested to him by Amer Maxwell. It was Gavin Maxwell's brother. Does anyone read Gavin Maxwell? We might have read we might know of A Ring of Bright Water. He gave him the title, which is The Time of Gifts is Gone. Somewhere I've written it down here. The time of gift, for now the time of gifts is gone, O boys that grow, O snows that melt, O bathos that the years must fill. And of course we don't need the bathos that the years must fill. The years were filled with extraordinary words. But the time of gifts is gone. Not the time of gifts, but a time of gifts. And sense that a time of gifts, yes, the time of gifts is gone as soon as you say, oh, that was a time, that was a good time. It's gone. And a time of gifts is not gone. We can say the time of gifts is gone, but a time of gifts is not gone. A time of gifts remains very much with us. And I would now like, because I was asked how I first got interested in Leigh Fermor, which was a little bit before the appearance of the time of A Time of Gifts, which is how I recall with clarity that I would not like to be challenged over what his reputation was at the time. He had written, this is 1977, he had written a review in the TLS, Times Literary Supplement, of a book by George Seferis, of my little writings, Micropaedia, my little teachings, which is reprinted, that review is reprinted in the selection of Leigh Fermor's work, Words of Mercury, edited by Artemis Cooper some 20 years ago. And he talks about Seferis' mythologies, a sequence of poems, of which the last line is, men of the Marmion class, sons of the free. Seferis had recently learnt, Leigh Fermor writes, I hope the details are correct. There is no way of checking them under these deodars. That towards the end of his life, a friend of Thomas Hardy's had given him The Wasteland and asked his opinion, which was, a week later, very interesting, but is it quite in the Marmion class? The haunting phrase wove itself several times into George's crepuscular murmurs. Now, was it in the Marmion class? Marmion, nobody here has read Marmion. Has anyone here read Marmion? A long time ago. Well, it's a very long poem by Sir Walter Scott. And of course, Scott used to be regarded as a great, great poet. So, in consequence, I have to explain what happened. I wrote a letter to the TLS pointing out that it was not The Wasteland, but that it was, in fact, the Iliad that Hardy was supposed to have said was not quite in the Marmion class, which is truly absurd. And the source for this is Robert Graves, and it's in Goodbye to All That. So I pointed out that not only was this, not only was it not The Wasteland, but the whole story was thoroughly unreliable, because it may well be that a cosmopolitan like Robert Graves would like to patronize a rustic like Thomas Hardy and say, oh, he couldn't tell the difference, or he thought Homer wasn't as good as Marmion. And it rather destroyed the whole story. But of course, it gave Sir Ferris this wonderful phrase. And I think it's through that phrase that it might have sort of come back into English. Anyway, I then received from Thailand a letter. This is in March 1977. Dear Mr. Locke, I was very glad to learn the correct source of the Marmion class, forwarded by the TLS. I had an eerie feeling I was on uncertain ground the moment I had posted the piece in Simla, and very glad I hedged my bets. I must look up the passage in Goodbye to All That, which I haven't read for years. Your correction reached me in Sumatra. Even less hope of doing so among those mangroves than under the deodars. Yours sincerely, Patrick Leigh Fermor. So I wrote back and just said that I don't know what I wrote. I mean, I don't have no idea what I haven't got the TLS letter either. But he then wrote again a few weeks later. It wasn't at all magisterial. Absolutely right. Presumably, I had apologised for issuing such a magisterially toned correction. And maybe somebody by then had told me who Leigh Fermor was. It wasn't at all magisterial, absolutely right. But I can't help wishing it had been the wasteland. And then the moment I got back here, I hunted for the paperback of Goodbye to All That, and am now deep in it, after not having read it for years. I'd forgotten how good it was. Semicolon. Then he writes so, and then he deletes it. Yours sincerely, Patrick Leigh Fermor. And in that deletion, I thought, no, that's it. So I'm very glad you've brought me back to Goodbye to All That. But so deleted, I thought, no. And then when in September, A Time of Gifts came out, I, of course, read it at once. I was absolutely knocked out by it. And I thought, no, I cannot possibly continue a correspondence with such a genius as this. So this is, as it were, apologizes for my almost 50-year obsession with Leigh Fermor. And I could go on and on. And I have really tried to condense into 50 minutes, to condense what I feel needs to be said at the moment about Leigh Fermor. But as I say, The Time of Gifts, there is one thing I would add to that. I did write him once more. After his wife died, I thought, now maybe I can write to him. And this, of course, was in 2003, so I had a record of it. And of course, I wasn't expecting an answer, didn't want an answer, but I just told him how important he had been to me. I have often wanted to write to you to say how much your books have meant to me, how they invoke a world that seems to belong only to the past, that yet could belong to anyone brave and independent enough to break out of this one. I was rather shocked reading this week, finding this letter for the first time in over 20 years, that I dared to say that to him. Because I was saying, right, we can all do it if we just get out of the... we may not do it in the same way, we may not walk to Constantinople, but there are ways of, as it were, creating our own time of gifts. Thank you.
So, yes, thank you for, shining a spotlight on his, the lesser known work about the Caribbean, and also mentioning, Walcott and Rastafarian movement. So my question, what was his view of, Rastafarian movement, and also any, nationalists movement which were, taking shape at the time? Because if I, contrast him with, V.S. Naipaul, V.S. Naipaul of the Caribbean was very dark, and Derek Walcott once said he was, Sir Nightfall.
Yes. V.S.
Yes,
Nightfall.
on account of his,
Yeah.
dark portrayal of the Caribbean. So just would you tell us a little bit more about his, the lesser known work, and what was happening, to give a sense of the...
Well, I think that the best thing to read is Jelly Shapiro's introduction to the Traveller's Tree, because he's a contemporary who has written a book on the Caribbean and on the history of Cuba as well, I think. And certainly V.S. Nightfall, that's a wonderful name. I think Walcott uses that in a poem. Yes, Naipaul was out-Britishing the Brits in trashing the West Indies. And I don't know, I'm not aware, certainly not of any published material that of Leigh Fermor ever mentioning the Caribbean again. But it's certainly there somewhere in the correspondence, but maybe not in the published correspondence, but I haven't been through all the correspondence looking for it. But it just struck me in preparing for this talk that this is something to be looked at. And rereading The Traveller's Tree, what an amazing book it is. And why is it not known to students of imperial and early post-colonial history? Because it is such a witness from a sympathetic imperialist, or at least a sympathetic Brit, who's not an imperialist. And it seemed to me to fit with, to go quite well with, say, Gerald Brennan on Spain, and other. It's much more hostile to the empire than, say, Jan Morris's imperial trilogy, which is a few years, 10, 15 years later. So I think it would be, anyway, worth reading The Traveller's Tree and looking into the influence that it's had on Caribbean writers. I can say, I'll tell another story. I was with, I invited Derek Walcott to Toronto when I was teaching at Toronto, and I had to take him to another university there called York University, where there was an Indian professor, a Caribbean Indian called Frank Birbal Singh. And I took Walcott to Birbal Singh's office, and Birbal Singh said, "Look, Derek, this is all we've written." And there was a typical bookcase. This is everything that's been written by us, Caribbean writers in English. And Derek said, "Wow, we've done all that?" And then he looked at the very top shelf and he said, "Where do I come in?" And he came in about number 6, you see. And there were probably 400 or 500 volumes altogether. No? And that was a moment of absolute illumination for me, to think that not a nation, but an area, a region, could, as it were, display its literature like that, and all fitted on one shelf. And of course, Walcott, along with Naipaul and a few others, filling a large proportion of it. But of course, Leigh Fermor wasn't there, and I at that time had not read The Traveller's Tree, so I damn annoyed. I never asked him. I've asked, what was The Traveller's Tree in up there? I don't think so. It was not the white imperialist writing, but since then I've noticed The Traveller's Tree in Walcott's poetry. So,
introduce ourselves, or not really? Well, anyway,
This is George
Yorgos
Giannakopoulos.
Giannakopoulos, I'm a historian. Greek, happens to be Greek, and also happens to be from the area where Patrick Leigh Fermor's house was. So is rather still. So I have two quick questions, Charles, and thank you so much for this. And I should start by professing not much knowledge on his travel writing. So to put that on the table. Question number one: home. Right, for someone as a travel writer who was very mobile, wrote about many regions, many parts of the world, etc. He constructed a home in a place that was far from his actual, where he grew up, and that home was in southern Greece, in the Peloponnese. So I wonder, the first question quickly is like how home comes into his travel writing, and if it does, and in what way, according to your reading. So that's one point. And the second point, just to clarify something you mentioned and possibly push it a bit in the further direction, you present him as someone who is like, not anti-Hellenist, but say that the 19th century Hellenism and that sort of travel writing wasn't quite what he was doing. There's a version of modernism here, right? That's kind of different. Or is there than 19th century understandings of the Grand Tour, of what happens in that part of the world. And here so I'd want to tease you in that direction, speak a bit more about exactly what is different with or what kind of Hellenism he espouses that's not the classical one.
Right. Home, I think, is perhaps too easily dismissed by saying that he did not like England. He returned to England because his wife had a house in Gloucestershire, which is actually where he's buried, rather oddly, while Bruce Chatwin is buried at Cardamuli, which seems Exahori, but close to, which is going to confuse archaeologists if there are no documents left. So I think home, we can say that he never writes with enthusiasm about England. I mean, leaving as he did at 18, I think. Yes.
He chose to die in England, and he died the day after he landed in England. But it was his choice.
It was his choice. Does this come with any sort of explanation or?
No, I'm afraid it doesn't.
Yeah.
But it must have meant something to him.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, he loved Cardamili so much, and they all loved him, and I don't understand really why but he was very clear about that.
Well, I mean, one possible thing is that if he died in Cardamili, he would have had an Orthodox funeral, which Bruce Chatwin had.
Do you think that would have bothered him?
Yes.
I'm not sure.
I think it has everything to do with Constantinople, Mount Athos. I think there's a sort of resistance all the way through.
I'm sure you know more about it than I do.
Well, he had an Anglican funeral at Dumbleton, didn't he?
He did. Yes, just a very traditional funeral.
Yeah.
Can I share, an experience which is, I'm not a historian or an academic at all, but I'm a massive admirer and fan of Leigh Fermor. Now, I find myself in Cardamili on holiday with my family. And I find the house, this is before it's been turned now into a hotel and a writer's retreat. And I went there because just almost like on a pilgrimage. He had already died. So this must be about 10 years ago. I think my daughter's. But I remember walking with, so this is just an anecdote, so this is not a question, but I question whether he wanted to die in England, because I walked along the wall, and then the wall, I remember it so clearly. The wall came down, and I'd read Artemis Cooper's biography, and I could see that his writing room, and I hopped over the wall. And the window into his writing house room was open. And it looked like somebody had just popped out to, the local shop. It looked like he expected to come back. It wasn't tidy. It wasn't anything like that. It was just, it was just random. And then I realized, my God, why is the window open? Oh my God. And then I realized it must be somebody sort of cleaning and sort of keeping and all sorts of things, I think. But it just looked like he expected to return.
As it happens, Hugh and I, my husband Hugh and I, were in Cardamili. We had been invited by Paddy, and we were going to be not actually staying at Cardamili, but in the hotel just behind it, but spending our days with him at Cardamili. And the day we arrived, what's his name? Oh, come on, Orlando's father.
Olivia?
Anyway, came to see us at the hotel and told us that Paddy had been taken that morning to hospital and he never came out. So we were in this strange position, and we went there. We went to the house. It was like the Marie Celeste. His breakfast was, it was really, he wasn't expecting to leave like that, but he never came back there. That was it. He was in hospital for some weeks, and then he made the decision to be flown back to England. So that's how it happened, just to explain.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
And I also want to say that Hugh and I have had a wonderful, wonderful time in Edinburgh, looking through the Patrick Leigh Fermor archive. I hope you have too.
No.
Well,
chance.
that is a pleasure that really awaits you, because his letters are fantastic. Better than any of his books, really.
Well,
Just fantastic.
well,
You'll
certainly
find your own letters there.
I fear I
He
would.
kept everything.
But no, I don't. I mean, the letters that have been published, the letters selected by Adam Sisman and the letters to the Duchess of Devonshire, they are absolutely magnificent.
I hope you've read more of his letters. Adam Sisman, yes. Adam Sisman, yes.
Yes,
Both volumes.
yes,
Yes.
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 And 3 letters from the Andes. Just keeping up, yeah. But George, I only got onto home, and we had and this led to a most interesting disclosure. No, very important. What the other question?
The version of Hellenism, but you can.
Yeah.
My dad was in Greece during World War II and found himself on the Taygetos Mountains for about 6 months, from the end of April 41 to October, the end of October 41. And I've sort of tried to find his history and where he was and which villages he might have visited. And I was reading Paddy's book, The Mani, and he visited a village called Flomachori. And the villagers, he said, all treated them to a great feast, as is the great Greek tradition of hospitality. And he said they excitedly said, did he know Captain Marco? And Paddy said remarkably he did. Captain Marco was a chap called Mark Ogilvie Grant, who I know had been with my dad during his time on the mountains. And then there were a series of names, sort of Sandy, which my dad was known as Sandy, but at first it didn't. I just thought these names were made up, like Tom, Dick and Harry, But subsequently I found prisoner of war questionnaires of people called Sid and Ernie, and all these names are together, mentioned by Paddy. So his memory must have been phenomenal, because it was 1954, I think, when he visited Flomachuri, and he'd remembered that and put it down. So I think that's an example of his amazing memory. Yeah. Anyway, that's that.
Well, I don't think I need one. But I will take up George's point about Hellenism and so on, because actually Mark Ogilvy Grant and Talbot Rice and Thomas Whittemore, you mentioned the Grand Tour. The very opposite. I'm not aware of Leigh Fermor even helping anyone help him or herself to any antiquity, to anything. Whereas all the others, well, I think I can say, were always prospecting, looking for, Talbot Rice and Byron were certainly looking for icons and such, ancient things that nobody cared about. And Leigh Fermor, absolutely not. I'd be interested to know whether anybody can find a record, because I cannot see anywhere in his writings or his correspondence anything about how, that would be a nice piece to have. And it is the antithesis of a traveller who comes from home, goes on the tour, and wants to pick up a few souvenirs. There's nothing of that. And that really does put him at a great distance from the usual English gentleman in Greece.
The fact that he gave his home to the Benaki Museum.
And gave his home, yes. It's a sort of a revenge on Lord Elgin.
Any final questions? Okay, well, I'm reluctant to call an end to this wonderful event, but thank you so much, Charles, for giving such a great talk, and thank you, everybody, for showing up and asking such wonderful questions.
Well, thank you very much, too. Thank you very much.